Hey, good morning, everyone. Teachers, right? Yeah. I hope you all had some good night's sleep and a great breakfast. Maybe you dreamt of APIs. I hope you did. Yesterday was the hard part in my mind. Today will be a bit more chill, but I will ask some things of you as well. So I would love it if you have a laptop or a notebook or a tablet that you can use to interact with some APIs together with me today. We're going to start today with a little bit more in-depth kind of view of APIs. We're going to more specifically look at cultural heritage APIs and museum APIs. So where we left off yesterday was learning about consoles or playgrounds, which makes it really easy to interact with APIs without the need for programming. And we did a little test using the Europeana REST API console. I wanted to show you some other kind of next step ways for interacting with APIs. Once you use a console for a bit, you might be comfortable with using it, and if you want to take the next step. Future classroom is great. Going to adjust things. Thank you, François. Perfect. So what a lot of developers themselves use when they start interacting with APIs, especially if an API doesn't have a console or a playground, are other programs that let you interact with APIs. The biggest one is called Postman, and it basically works the same as a console would, but it gives you a few extra features like being able to save the API calls that you've made, being able to create new API parameters and calls, and save things like your API key, so you don't need to re-enter your API key or credentials every time. So especially if you're a researcher that is doing a lot of API calls, using something like Postman is great. The last step, which we won't do today because this is about low coding, so we won't do any programming, is of course by interacting with an API through programming. And I wanted to kind of just show you what using some programming for using APIs can do if you're, for instance, in the midst of developing an app. So imagine, well, I want to go to this, yes. Imagine that you want to create a small little plugin using Europeana, and you want to use the Europeana search API to just have a nice little thing on your own website where other people can use the Europeana search to find some results without even having to go to Europeana itself. So this is a kind of online test grounds if you want to develop a small little app. It has some HTML, it has some CSS to make things pretty, so that means that you can edit the website itself. Instead of European School Net, I can change the HTML to say hello Brussels, and I can change the CSS. Instead of blue, maybe I want this to be red, so I would change that in CSS, and then we would run this, and it would say hello Brussels in red in our output. So this is what the actual website would look like. Okay, the actual scary but interesting part is the JavaScript at the bottom. This is the actual programming that will interact with the API in the same way that we interacted with it through the browser yesterday. So looking through all of this code, this is the important part. It says variable API call, and then it gives a URL in the same way that we put in a URL yesterday. So if you would then go to this little box and say, let's search Europeana for chocolate, and submit it, it would make this API call, and it would put the results back into the HTML on the right side. So you see here, we have some nice results, chocolate truffles with dark chocolate, and it has taken different fields from the API response and put them back into the HTML. So you can see in the JavaScript that it is looking at a few fields and taking them for the output. So it's taking the title and putting it right here as a title. It's taking the thumbnail image and putting the thumbnail there. It's also created a download link. So if you click on this thumbnail, you would go to the original object in Europeana if it wants to load. Great. Lovely breakfast. So that is kind of the last step of using APIs in programming, just to give you a taste of what that looks like. Now, I promised yesterday I would give you some examples of how other people have used Europeana's APIs. One example I really like to show the possibilities for research of using an API is what a digital humanities student did last year. She was a student from KU Leuven, and she was really interested in Soviet propaganda. She came from the East Bloc herself, and she searched Europeana for Soviet propaganda and found a lot of really interesting posters from the USSR. So here are some examples of that. And she wanted to create some kind of research using these posters. So she looked at a single poster and went through the metadata on the API to see what kind of data and metadata was available about these posters. There was one field that she really was interested in called EDM component color, which basically has a few hex values, and these values are actual color values. So what we do at Europeana is every item that we ingest into our database, we also analyze to see what the main colors in the item in the object are, so that we can give the possibility to people searching Europeana to search by color. If you want to search items that mostly have red in it, you can click the little red color swatch and it will show you items that are red. Really useful, but that means that this metadata is also, of course, findable for every object. So what this user did was download a bunch of Soviet posters from Europeana and analyze this specific metadata field, not even really looking at the rest of the metadata. And she created something that was inspired by this piece of research by Lev Manovich, who's a really interesting online researcher. He created this collage called Timeline in, I think, somewhere back in 2010. And Timeline is a piece of research where he took all of the front pages of Time magazine and he put them in a collage from oldest to newest. So this is actually on its side. So you need to look at it like this. This is the oldest Time magazine cover, and then it goes all the way up to the most recent Time magazine cover. And using this collage, he could find already some really interesting insights into how Time magazine evolved over the years and over the decades. There's some really interesting things that we already can see, that there was a lot more white space at the beginning of Time magazine, and then it becomes more crowded and fuller and more colorful as time goes on. At the very start, everything was still in black and white, and then we start seeing color right around here. But there were some other interesting things that you could only see if you had made this collage instead of looking at every front page side by side. So Time magazine apparently has a blue period somewhere in these decades, and then it changes into a red period for a few years. And Lev Manovich, wrote how these insights kind of could have been garnered, talking about how the Cold War influenced color usage throughout Time magazine's life. And so this researcher from KU Leuven wants to do the same, but with Soviet posters. This is a close-up from the Time magazine timeline project. And so a researcher called Elizaveta did the same, but with these Soviet posters. Downloaded them all, arranged them chronologically, and then made them into a nice collage. And so here she also could garner some insights about, of course, red, for instance, is a very important color in Soviet propaganda, but also the kind of green and beige colors and even purple are very striking, important colors in the lifetime of those posters. She was able to do all this without having to program anything, just going through the API, downloading these data sets, taking them into a CSV, into a spreadsheet, and analyzing that spreadsheet. And what I mostly want to stress is that if you're a researcher using APIs for your own research, you can do some coding to get data sets together for yourself, but there are a lot of ways today that you can use APIs to create your own spreadsheets, your own data sets that don't need any coding. The kind of little plugin that I like very much that allows you to do this is called Import JSON, and it's a little plugin for Chrome that you can use together with Google Sheets. So Google Sheets is like Excel, but from Google. And what it basically does is it allows you to take any API call and import the results of that API call directly into a spreadsheet so that you don't have to deal with these API results anymore. It's all in a nice, neat spreadsheet for you. And you can even select which fields from the API you specifically want to extract. So for instance, you want to say, only give me that EDM component color, and put that into a spreadsheet. You download the spreadsheet and you have your data set made perfectly for you without any coding needed, all using this little plugin. Another example of how you can use APIs is, of course, to develop your own programs and your own apps. One example I wanted to highlight is called eCodex, which was a prototype made by a team only a few weeks ago during a hackathon in Sofia. They wanted to, their goal was to create some kind of app that got students and kids outside and exploring more. So what they did was create an AR app very similar to Pokemon Go. They called it Pokemon Go for biology or for nature. And what eCodex does is it allows you to go outside and take a picture of a plant or an animal, so an insect or a daffodil or whatever, and it would connect to two APIs. It would connect to the Google Vision API, which would do some object detection on that image and tell you what the thing that you photographed actually was. It would tell you, oh, you've just photographed a bumblebee, and it would give you some information about bumblebees. Great. The other thing that it did was it connected to the Europeana API to then do a search for locations around you to see if there were any interesting objects that were found or captured close to where you were. So it said, did you know that another legendary explorer or biologist or botanist found these really interesting specimens very close to where you took this picture? So not only did it teach you about whatever you captured as a picture, but it also showed you what other maybe very rare species of plants were collected close to you, near to you. And the goal of that was to kind of make you feel like you were part of a long line of explorers, of botanists, of biologists, capturing things, conserving them, archiving them. And it maybe made you interested in going to your local natural history museum close by to see those objects that were archived there. So that's eCodex. I really love that example. And to keep with the low code kind of idea, there's a lot of little applets, programs that you can create yourself without having to code by just taking several APIs and pulling them together into one thing. One platform I really like is called If This Then That, or IFTTT for short. And what it basically does is it allows you to do exactly this: take a few APIs, mash them together, and create a really neat little app with it. So to give you some examples of what is on the If This Then That homepage right now, and note there is a lot of stuff like remind yourself to meditate every day is a really easy one, right? You would connect your Google Calendar API to maybe your meditation app, and it would tell you, okay, every time I put in a Google Calendar event, maybe every day, that says, hey, meditate for 30 minutes. And you would have created your own little reminder app just using two APIs and putting them together. It also integrates with a lot of smart home and Google Assistant kind of stuff. So one thing I saw yesterday was that there's a little outlet that allows you, if you have an automatic mower, you have Roombas for your home, but now you also have Roombas for your garden that will cut your grass for you and then go back into its nice little cradle. Someone created an applet that allowed you to create a Google Calendar event that said, I'm having a barbecue today, or my friends are coming over, or my dog is playing in the garden on Saturday. I want the mower to be not in the garden at that time so that my friends don't trip over this mower. So if you would say barbecue in your Google Calendar on Saturday, the mower would see that and it would make sure that it's back in its cradle. It had mowed the garden before that happened. And you can create that without any coding. So what things that I've done with If This Then That are much simpler, not as complex as that. But what I used to do was I'm a project manager for a lot of external projects. And those projects often use a specific hashtag on Twitter or on social media to kind of show what they've done throughout the project. And I knew that at the end of the project, we would have to go back to the commission and say, hey, these are all of the great things that we did. So I created a little applet that every time someone tweeted using a specific hashtag, so for the Crafted project, that was hashtag crafting heritage, it would add a line to a spreadsheet with a link to that tweet, when it was tweeted and who it was tweeted by. So that at the end of the project, I would have a neat spreadsheet that would say, oh, there have been more than 400 tweets about crafting heritage from these different users. And I didn't have to do anything. I just had to let it run in the background and then show this very nicely to the commission afterwards. So everyone, I think, has these little kind of problems that they would like to automate or that they would like to make easier. And as long as there are open APIs that support it, you can probably use if this and that or another platform to make that work for you. Great. So, as promised, cultural heritage. Museums are very different to the social media apps and APIs that we've been looking at mostly, often because cultural heritage institutions are publicly funded, they don't have this commercial drive, they don't need to sell things mostly. They mostly want you to have access to their data, and having an open API is, of course, one of the best things to do there. So the wonderful researcher Mia Ridge from, I think, the UK College of London has created a kind of website that collects almost all APIs that exist in the cultural heritage sphere. It's focused on museum APIs, but you can find library APIs and gallery and archive APIs there as well. The website is called museum-api.pbworks.com. And I suggest we just go to it together quickly to see what the options are. Yes, great. So, I mean, it's quite a simply made website, but it really does everything you want. It's a huge list of all the APIs in cultural heritage that exist and that you can connect to. So if you're ever interested in using data from a very specific institution, the best thing to do is either go to this website and see if they have an API, or go to their own collection website and see if you can connect to it in some way. So there's, for instance, the Harvard Art Museum's API, and it would send you directly to the documentation for this API itself. Not all museum APIs are created equal. There are very different kind of levels of integration and levels of access that you get through museum APIs. So I very shortly wanted to walk through the different options that exist in cultural heritage kind of data access. The lowest level of access is the ability to download data sets. So these aren't even real APIs. These are often institutions that provide their data in some kind of downloadable CSV or Excel sheet that you then probably have to clean up yourself and deal with yourself to get to a good data set. But often these can already be very useful, especially for researchers as well, that are mostly looking for spreadsheets or CSV data sets anyway. So one I really like is the Data Foundry from the National Library of Scotland. It has a bunch of data collected into different data sets. So looking at some of their digitized collections, you could download data sets about the history of the Encyclopedia Britannica over 200 years, or a medical history of British India, and you would basically get a spreadsheet that has records for all of the objects that they have related to this topic, and metadata linked to all of these topics together. So downloading data sets is kind of the basic baseline of getting access to your collections. The next step would be to allowing people to search your collections using an API in the same way as you would search it online. So we saw this example with the Europeana search API yesterday. The next step after that, also mostly interesting for researchers or people that want to create their own program or app that gives access to the full data set of a collection, is giving the possibility of harvesting a complete collection using OAI PMH. OAI PMH is a standard for downloading a complete data set or parts of a data set very quickly. So it allows you to harvest a lot of data in very little time. And so if you want to download all of Europeana's almost 60 million objects, you could do so doing OAI PMH, given that you have a big enough hard drive, basically. There's other interesting standards that are open and interoperable that there are often APIs for to access. IIIF is a really interesting one. It gives access to images in very high resolution. You can zoom into them and really look at small details. So this is great for instance, digitized manuscripts that have very little, specific details that you want to look at. So getting access to those standards, you can also often do using GLAM APIs. And then another really exciting one, even though it may look a bit boring, is getting access to ontologies and vocabularies. I've put the example of the Meketre vocabulary here, which is a vocabulary focused on Egyptological research. So it gives you a full thesaurus of all of the terms that Egyptologists or archaeologists would use when describing objects. It's a really great way to learn about these topics and to start tagging and curating your own data sets using the correct linked open data terms. Right. Important message, in my opinion, if you're an open GLAM, or if you say that you're an open GLAM, a cultural heritage institution that gives access to all of your data, I feel like you should also have an open API. A lot of cultural heritage institutions call themselves open GLAMs because they give access to their content online through a search bar, and you can download some of those objects, but often they're still kind of siloed into their own platform, their own website, and you can only access it using their search bar or using their search solution without really getting access to the database underneath. So one example of this is the Yale collections. They created their own open collection database very recently. This was, I think, just a month or two ago. They they revealed Lux, which is their new content management search system, and you could look through more than 11 million wonderful cultural heritage objects from the Yale collections, which is great. But this line also kind of is my sentiment about it. It all is still in its own cage. You can access it, you can look at it, but you cannot really reuse it, download it, do something more interesting with it. So it's kind of locked up in this golden cage where you can see it, but you can't really do anything with it because it doesn't have an open API that allows you to access that data, use it in something else, or create your own data sets from it. So this is me when I see collections like this. And hopefully they have said that in the future they will connect an API to this. Hopefully in a year or two, these things often take quite some time to finally let us into their collections. An example of a cultural heritage institution that is kind of top of the class, that is doing very well, is the Nasjonalmuseet in Norway. It's the National Museum of Norway. They have an API that is very kind of bare bones. It's very basic. They just started working on it a few years ago, but they are already reaping the benefits of having their access open, accessible, and free to reuse. So there's happy faces talking about, all of the things that they can do with open APIs, and we already see people creating new integrations, new features, new programs based on their data. So one that I wanted to showcase that I really love is called Klima. It's a really small little prototype that was created by a few students in a hackathon a few years ago. Their goal with this little app that they developed was to have an app that is useful, relatable, and got you into a gallery or got you into a cultural heritage institution. So all this app did was provide you weather info of where you were. It would say, okay, it's 11 degrees and rainy, where you are in Oslo right now. It would be relatable by choosing a piece of art from the National Museum collection that reflected the weather that you were in. If it was rainy, you would get, for instance, a sad dog looking at puddles. And the last thing it would do, because it wanted to get you into a gallery, is it would also show you how many hours the gallery was still open for, or what the opening times were of museums and galleries near you. So a very simple idea that was executed really well, showing you some really interesting art while also getting the weather. And let's look at more pages. And also saying, well, it's really rainy right now. The museum is open for 3 more hours. Maybe it's a really good idea to go there and look at some more art. And so the Yale collections wouldn't be able to get a nice app like this because they don't have an API that supports it yet. So that's cultural heritage institutions APIs, why they should be open, and what you can do with it. Let's go a bit more in depth about Europeana's APIs, because later we will use those ourselves a little bit to do some searches and get some more knowledge. So recapping here, we're going to talk about that little USB that connects Europeana to other apps, which are APIs. This figure is lying a little bit because it's not like we have one access point. We don't have one USB cable. We actually have a bunch of APIs. Before I continue on, it would be great if you could get an API key before we start our work. So if you don't have one yet, please go to pro.europeana.eu/resources. I think it might be pages. Yes. So pro.europeana.eu/pages/APIs, and there should be a button there that says get your API key here. If you click that, you will have to fill in a short form, and you would get an API key sent to you to your email address automatically. So that should work by itself. The URL. So it's pro.europeana.eu/pages/APIs. It's also on Padlet if you want to open the link there. Okay.
Thank you.
That makes it a lot easier. Once you have an API key, you get access not to one API, you get access to a bunch of Europeana APIs, all without any limits. So instead of having one access that does a lot of things, we connected all of the different parts of Europeana to different APIs that make it really easy to do exactly what you want to do with one API without getting in a bunch of data or information that you don't need. So we have the search API, it speaks for itself, we already used it. If you want to search Europeana and get a response with results, you would use the search API. The record API gives you all of the information about one single object. So if there's one object you want all of the metadata for, you would just put in the ID of that object and it would give you all of that information. Then we have a few more kind of advanced or specific APIs. We have a IIIF API that allows you to harvest really high resolution images and reuse them. We have a Sparkle endpoint, which sounds really nice. It's mostly about federating with other APIs at the same time. You can connect Wikidata to Europeana through Sparkle and things like that. We have an annotation API. We have an OAI-PMH service. Our vocabularies and thesauri are available through our linked open data API. And we also have a bit more, let's say, basic access to data sets that just allow you to connect to an FTP server and download a specific data set in CSV or XML as well. So a wealth of information, a wealth of APIs. This means that when you start using a Europeana API, or any API in that case, it's really important that when you read documentation, you think about what the actual use case is you want to use an API for, so that you start using the right API for the right goal. If you, for instance, want all of the 18th century books that are about sofas in France, then you would use the search API because you're actually making a big search query, right? You will have specific filters that you want. You would search for those filters, France books about sofas, and you would get a response. If you are a researcher that is only working on 5 objects, and these are really important objects to you, and you need to have all of the information, you would use the record API to get all of the information about those 5 objects. If you want to add things back to Europeana, maybe you're creating a program or an app that allows people to tag interesting cultural heritage objects with new tags, maybe curating them yourself, you could use the annotations API and send those tags back to Europeana, so you're enriching our database as well. And so this is where, in these 4 steps I explained yesterday, reading documentation is important because you probably have a use case in mind that this is what I want to do, and knowing how you can do it is what you learn through reading the documentation and then choosing the correct API for your needs. Right. Reading the documentation makes you understand the data behind an API. I've been talking about how behind an API there's often spreadsheets, CSVs, Excels. More and more we're seeing databases that are based on graph-based models, and this is what the Europeana data model uses as well. It's a bit different than how a CSV works or how a spreadsheet works in that it works with triples. So bear with me. A triple basically exists out of 3 parts. It has a subject, a predicate, and an object. It describes something with some kind of descriptor. So in Europeana, when we have an object like this, it might have metadata that looks like this. And it says, this object, provided CHO number, blah, 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 this would be the ID of the object, has a title, clavecin in French. So this is a clavecymbal in Dutch, or a harpsichord in English. So this is the subject. It has a predicate. This described by this is the clavicin. So it all exists in these three kind of little pieces of metadata that together form a triple, because there's three of them: a subject, a predicate, and an object. Now, the nice thing about triples and why we use those instead of a spreadsheet is that you can connect triples to each other and create this nice network of metadata. Not only does this object have a title clavisymbol, this same object has the type and then a SCOS concept, which is a URL. So this is a linked open data term that is meant for computers to read and not for us. So luckily, this triple has some more connected triples that makes it human readable. This subject has an object, a label, harpsichord in English. Okay, so this URL, this concept, actually refers to a harpsichord, but in a linked open data way. So using these triples, these three pieces of metadata that connect to each other, we can connect multiple triples to each other and create this huge network of metadata about a single object or about a whole data set. This is really complex to deal with if you're a database administrator and you need to connect all of these together. So I'm only explaining this so that if you connect to the API, you can keep in your mind where these data fields actually come from. But the beautiful thing about an API is that you don't need to know anything more about this data model, because it will all come to you in this expected interoperable way, instead of in this huge network that suddenly you need to find your way into yourself. So because we use triples, linked open data, and RDF, the way that our objects are connected and collected with each other work in different layers. So there's different layers of information about a cultural heritage object in and of itself, and we try to reflect that in our metadata as well. Because if we're talking about a museum object, a vase, for instance, and you digitize that vase and you add metadata and images to that vase, and you then send that to Europeana, you have added a lot of different layers of meaning to this object. There's a physical object itself, the vase. Okay, great. That's the first layer, what we call the provided cultural heritage object. From that vase, you've created a data object. You've digitized it in some way. You've maybe taken some pictures of it or video of it, or you scanned it in 3D in some way. This means that you've created a data object. This data object could be made of multiple specific representations of that object. If you've made 10 pictures of this vase, you took pictures all around, you now have 10 different representations of that data object, and that's what we call aggregations. And then we have contextual information about that object. This is more metadata side of the object. Things that aren't part of the object itself, but do describe it in some way. So who made this vase? When was it made? In which workshop was it made? This is all contextual information. So keeping this in mind will let you kind of parse all of the information you see in Europeana, because if you look at the metadata of an object, everything is made up of these different things. So if you look at an object in Europeana, this is a letter in German, I think, from the German National Library. The letter itself is a physical object, but it has been digitized using multiple pictures because the letter has multiple pages. So that means that we have the data object of the letter, and it has multiple representations of that letter put into multiple images. Each of these images will have its own metadata. The text on page 1 is different than the text on page 2. Maybe the resolution of page 1 is different than page 2. So it will all have different metadata fields. And then we have contextual information. So the subject of this letter is something to do with World War I, apparently. It has some more contextual information. It's now in The Hague. It came from Berlin. It's part of Europeana's 1914 to 1918 collections. So this is important when you're actually looking at the metadata of an object. Let me see my. This will work. Great, that's fine. Just need to add the API key. This. Oh. Sorry, it's hard to see the URL between all of the. Okay. So if you look at the metadata of that same letter object, we'll see that there's some basic first information, and then the object itself is split up into aggregations, and everything under here is kind of nested under this aggregations thing, right? So if we close this, we'll see that there are different pieces of aggregations that describe it. So if we go back to the aggregation itself, all of this metadata shows different parts. So we'll see that here, for instance, all of these different pages have their own specific URL. So this is URL of page 1, and then we'll go to page 2 and to page 3, and all of this has its own specific metadata. So this page, for instance, had the creator Jacoba van Heemskerk, while another page might be written by someone else or might have some different metadata attached to it. So, okay, so far, how Europeana structures its data into different layers. There are things that Europeana stores in its own database, but a lot of things that we have at Europeana are actually linked to other databases, to other servers, and aren't part of our API itself. So when you go through any API, but Europeana's API more specifically, a lot of the things you'll see there will be URLs, will be links to things that are external. Things that we do store in Europeana are the metadata itself. So the actual text that you saw in the API response is the metadata. We also store thumbnails, so small versions of the images of the objects that we generate, and some other, attached things like transcriptions and annotations. Importantly, what isn't in this list is the object itself. So the image, the PDF, the text, the 3D object, these aren't stored by Europeana itself. We don't have a huge server farm where all of these objects are. These are actually stored by the cultural heritage institutions in their own data storage in their own servers. So when you connect to our API, you'll see a bunch of metadata, but if you want to access the object itself, you will have to find the link to the specific object that is stored in that metadata. You will probably find the URL that ends in PDF or in JPEG, and if you click on that, you will go to the object in the server of the specific cultural heritage institution itself. So APIs work in this way where they connect a lot of things together, and if you don't find what you're specifically looking for in an API, it's probably linked in that in a metadata field somewhere to another server or to another database. Okay, insofar the theoretical framework, before we got our hands dirty, you all got an API key. That's great. Another kind of nice way to start exploring what our API calls look like is by going to our secret debug page on Europeana and enabling that. So I'm giving you the secrets of Europeana today by going to, if you go to Europeana.eu, maybe just only the second link is good enough. Europeana.eu/debug, you don't need to add the en, just Europeana.eu/debug. If you go to this URL, you will find a hidden secret developer menu. So this doesn't leave this room, okay? This is page not found? Okay. Is it with en next to it? Or? Oh no, it's not pro.europeana.eu. It's just Europeana.eu. So this is the URL, Europeana.eu/debug. This one. Are we all there? Europeana.eu/debug. And do you want to see that? Or so this second, oops, this second URL/debug. Give a second to get there. No, it's a second URL, so debug, not the for developers one. And if you're there, you should see something like this. It has one toggle, this one, enable debug menu. If you click it, you will enable, yes, you can put your API key here if you want to, and this will automatically fill it in for you. So I will fill in our demo API key here. And if you click the little toggle called enable debug menu, and if you put in your API key, you don't have to, but you can, and click save, you've now enabled Europeana's secret debug menu. Yes. So that means that when, from now on, if you search Europeana, let's do our good old chocolate search again. And if you now scroll to the bottom of your search results page, you will find this debug menu that wasn't there before. And this has a really useful thing called API requests. If you click on that, you will see all of the API requests that the Europeana website is making in the background while you're actually searching Europeana. So this kind of lets you peek behind the veil of Europeana to see what API requests that we are making to our own database. And that allows you to, is it not working for you? It says no requests. Are you not searching anything? So yes, do a search and then click API requests. On the homepage, we don't make any requests because it's just the homepage. Yes, so what you could do is if you then click on the first one, you're actually going to go to the API request that you just made on Europeana.eu, but on the API. So this is the exact same thing we did on Europeana.eu with our chocolate search, but in the API itself. So that means that you don't even need to use the API console or the filters there. You can make your specific search on Europeana.eu and then just hit API requests and you will have that API request ready for you. So that means that you can use some filters. You could say, you know, I want to have only images. I want to have things that are in color. Let's say that the type of media is an image. And I only want things that are reusable. And then you can look at the API requests for that. I'll let you play with that for a bit, and then I think we'll have a break. Okay, great. So play with these API requests for a bit. If there is any issue you have, let me know, and then we'll come back and do some API requests together, okay? Welcome back, everyone online. Welcome back, everyone in the room. I hope you had some coffee. I hope you could clear your mind a little bit from the overwhelming session this morning. The question I got the most during the break was, okay, we can do all of this stuff now. We can make an API request. We can get all of this data. Why? Why is this important? Why do students need to learn this? What actually can we do with this? So we're going to do a few exercises together that, in my mind, is something that you could do with secondary school students as well, to kind of show them how a website is formed, how the data from a website comes to be viewed on a website, and answer the questions that students have about where does all of this information that I'm seeing and that is being served to me actually come from. So hopefully you can create some critical reflection among students, among learners, on how the data that they see is created and where it actually comes from. So we'll start real slow and real simple. Let's prepare. We've done this. We've gotten an API key. Well done. We've enabled the debug menu. Great. We might use the console. I'll use the console on my screen, but you can also use the API requests that you just learned to use on Europeana.eu. So once we're prepared, challenge number one, let's try and find this banana on Europeana.eu, just using our search, and then we're going to try and find the same banana in the API. I promise you that it exists in Europeana. I don't know why, but it's there in our database. We're going to do this exercise together. So step one, on Europeana.eu, without using the API, use the search term single ripe banana. Great. So we will go to Europeana.eu, our homepage. In the search bar, we will type in single, so one, right, banana, right? And we'll search for it. We get one result. It is the banana we were looking for. Has everyone found this banana? I see nodding heads. We found the banana. Okay, great. Right. We're going to click on this banana to see it in all its glory and look at its metadata. So this is the point where you could ask yourself or ask students, how is this banana described? What is the metadata? Congratulations. How is it? How did curators, how did people that create this describe this banana? So we have our object. Every object in Europeana has a copyright license telling you if you can use it, if you cannot use it, how you can use it. That's always shown here. This banana is a Creative Commons banana. You can use it wherever you want. It's CC by SA, which means by you need to credit the author, and SA you need to share this banana using the same Creative Commons license that it is on itself. So you cannot make this banana in copyright if you download it and sell it on Etsy. No, it needs to be Creative Commons. So that's what CC by SA means. Scrolling down further, we'll find some more metadata. Title, single ripe banana. Really good title. Description. In Ireland, bananas are one of the largest contributors towards reaching the recommended target of 5 servings of fruit or vegetables a day. Others include tomatoes, carrots, orange juice, and apples. Okay, good description. And then we find some other metadata. We always have in Europeana the main small description of metadata in the Good to Know tab, but there's also the better tab called All Metadata, which gives you everything that has been used to describe this banana. It's been given to us by the local government management agency of Ireland. It has a subject. It is a photograph. The providing institution is the local government management agency. It's aggregated through Europeana Food and Drink, which is an old project where we aggregated a lot of food and drink objects. It has the right statement, and so on and so forth. This is all the rest of that metadata. Now, this is a really great place to either ask students about specific metadata fields. What do they mean? Why are they important? Why are they here? For instance, you can talk about the aggregation scenario of someone having that banana physically, taking a picture of it, describing its metadata, putting it on some collection management system, and then sending it to Europeana to kind of show the whole process of how something in a cultural heritage institution gets digitized. And we can see the little traces of that digitization in this metadata. We can see that it has an aggregator. We can see that it has a providing institution. It has been created at a certain date. So 2016 is when we got this wonderful item in our database. The second part of the exercise is finding the same banana on our API. We could use the console for this. We could use our browser for this. But now we have the power of our secret debug menu, so we don't have to do any of that. We can just click our new favorite button at the bottom of the page called API requests. And something that I just learned today is that it keeps your other requests and puts them in a list. And the last request in the list is your most recent one, which I had no idea about, but now we all know. On a record page, it's a little bit different because we're now on the item page for this one banana. And the first item will actually be the record itself. So this is actually not using the search API anymore because we did our search, we got our single ripe banana, that was using the search API, and then we clicked on the banana, and in the item page, we're actually using the record API because we want all of the metadata about this single item. So if we click on this, we'll actually go to the record API. And this is the exact same banana and its metadata, but in API format. If yours still doesn't look as pretty as this one does, on the Padlet, there is a link to a plugin called JSON Formatter, which will make this pretty, or like that. If you're not on the Padlet, so it's called JSON Formatter plugin. If you just Google for that, you should be able to find the plugin that makes this organized a bit prettier. So JSON Formatter plugin. So with students, you could start going through this same piece of the same object, the same piece of heritage, but in the API. and discover that all of the information that you saw on the item page is also available here, but in a machine-readable format. So one of the things you could talk about is, where does this image of this banana actually come from? We could, what I talked about earlier, we don't have actual images and objects on Europeana. These are all stored on different servers in the Cultural Heritage Institution itself. So let's try and find that URL of that banana. If you read the documentation, you would know that our objects are stored in a field called EDM is shown by, which doesn't mean a lot by itself, but that is where we store our actual images. And we see that it has a URL that points to, I'll make this a bit bigger so people can read, griffiths.askaboutirland.ie, and then the rest of the URL. So this is not a Europeana website, this is a different platform that is actually hosting this image of a banana somewhere on a server in Ireland. So let's go to that. Yes, our banana is back. Great. So we have found this object in the metadata. We can keep on going to see what the different other fields are that we can find. One that we can find, for instance, is DC rights. This is where we store our actual copyright information. So you would see CC attribution share alike, CC by SA, right? We remember this. We have a bunch of other fields that we can look to. This is some descriptive metadata, for instance. This is showing you the dimensions of the actual image. So it has a width of 1,990 pixels and a height of 1,134 pixels. So it's a big picture of a banana. The orientation of the picture is landscape. We find some IIIF resources about it. And then we have some linked open data concepts. So using APIs is also a great way to teach students about linked open data vocabularies, about thesauri, and just the linked open data web and RDF in general. So one of the things we see here is that the concept that it wants to convey to us is that this is a photograph of a banana. So we have a linked open data URL here, which is a Europeana entity. If we click that, we will go to all objects in Europeana that are described as a photograph. So the linked open data term has collected everything that is described as a photograph, and now we see all the photographs that are available in Europeana. So we can scroll this and look at all of the beautiful photographs that have been made and are available. So we see also that there's 6 million of these results in Europeana currently. One of the great things about linked open data is that it not only makes it easier to search and find objects, but also that it does this in a multilingual way. So the term photograph has been translated in all 27 European Union supported languages in Europeana. So even if you would search for the term Finnish is valokuva, apparently, you would also find everything that is tagged as a photograph, even if the curator itself had just put the English term or the Dutch term for photograph in its content management system. So this multilingual access might answer questions about, why am I seeing this English object while I was actually searching using a French term or something like that. So all the languages are there, which is why it's a big list. It has described what a photograph is in every language of these 27 languages. In English, the description is, a photograph is an image created by light falling on a light-sensitive surface. Great. And then we have the same description in all of the languages. And then we can see, not all, I'm sorry, not all of the languages, 27. The thing about linked open data is that it is linked with other vocabularies, right? So we could see here a list of all of the matches that we know that it exists in other vocabularies for the term photograph. We at Europeana have an entity for photographs, but Wikidata itself, here the first one, also has an entity for photograph. Schema.org has an entity for photograph, and so on and so forth. WorldCat, Iconclass, Getty AAT, these all have the same description of photograph. So if we click on this one, we'll go to the Wikidata term for photograph. And so if you want to start teaching students about Wikimedia Commons or Wikidata, starting with an API that uses Wikidata terms is a really great way to get them into the database and understanding why all of these vocabularies can link to each other. Let's not continue with Wikidata. So these are just a few of the questions and answers that you can have in a classroom when you're talking about metadata in an API response. There's a bunch more of that. We're not going to go through this whole metadata file together because it is quite long. But so, challenge 1 completed. We found the Europeana item for this banana, and we did it on the API as well. You could do the same exercise, not using the API requests, but by using the console, for instance. This would do the exact same thing, but on the console. Let's just do that so that we have that done as well. Let's go to our APIs. And go to the console. So in the console, you might remember that we have the record API and the search API. We're going to do a search because that's what we were doing. We're going to try it out. We have all of these different fields that we can put in. We only need 2. Our query, as we remembered, was single ripe banana. And our API key, which is the second term that you are required to use, we're going to use our demo API key, and then we'll hit execute. And this is the exact same result as what we saw in our API requests result. So again, local government agency, the description, the language, single ripe banana, it's a photograph, and so on and so forth. So we have done the exact same exercise using the console. Now I got a question from Giuseppe asking, how do we use the record API? If we have one item that we want to get all of the information from, how do we do this using the API as well? So if we look at this search API result, it will have an ID somewhere. That ID is here. So this is a specific ID for this banana. We're going to copy it. And now we can use the record API to get all of the metadata about this object itself. So we'll go away from our search API. And we're going to go into our record API to get a record. Let's get a single record in JSON format. This is a GET request as we talked about yesterday. And this has 3 required parameters. First is the API key. It's the same API key. The second is the collection ID and the record ID. So in Europeana, all data is structured in different data sets, also called collections. And then a data set might have 10 to a million records associated with that data set. If you look at our ID, which is this one, it is made up of 2 different parts. So behind the first slash, you actually have the name of the data set itself, which is 2059513. And the rest after the slash is the record ID. So we're going to only put the collection ID here, and we're going to put the record ID there. This gives us all the information that the API, the record API, needs to give us that banana. Let's hope that it works. And it does. Again, this is the exact same result, our Irish banana result. And we can check that by, for instance, looking at the is shown by again, pasting it. Yes, it is right. Good. We've all passed the first test. Congratulations. Second challenge. Do your own query. We've done bananas, we've done chocolate. Sorry if you're hungry now. Use any term that you want on Europeana.eu to find some results about the topic that interests you or that you want to find out more about. If you can, use one of the filters. So if you are on Europeana, we have a bunch of filters that kind of filter down your search. And this is also a great way to teach students about how you work through a database, search through a huge collection of items to find exactly what you're looking for. So let's do dogs this time. We get 6,572 results, which is way too many for a human to look through. So we have a bunch of filters that kind of filter down your result set into a smaller thing. So how about we only want images? We'll go to type of media, and it gives us some options. Let's do images. Click that. Our result set has now filtered down from these 6,000 items to about 3,000 items. So we already have items that we weren't interested in, text and 3D and video. We only want pretty images of dogs. Great. I'm already seeing some, makes me happy. What if we only want dogs that we can reuse? Maybe we have an Etsy store that we want to make nice dog t-shirts of. Let's do yes, I can use this item. So there are three options here: yes, maybe, and yes with conditions. Yes means that you will be able to reuse it in any case. You don't have to pay for it. It's not non-commercial. It's not non-derivative. It's completely open to use for everyone. We've again filtered down from 3,000 items to about 1,000 items. So we're really making our subset a lot smaller. And so we have about 1,000 images of dogs. These are all looking great. We can keep on going if we want to, using some different filters. We can filter on a different language. Maybe we only want objects from a specific country. We maybe only want images that are in landscape or in portrait. Let's go for landscape images. Lovely. And let's finish with selecting a theme. Maybe we only want dogs that are in art and not photographs. Nice. 136 results. This is a manageable, filtered down set right now that we have just created ourselves of some dogs that we could use, we could download, share with students, use for research, and so on and so forth. So I urge you to do the same with any term that you want. I'll give you a few minutes to do so. And then the next step would be to look at the API result of this and see how we can save it. So go ahead, use any term you want, and I'll be available for questions. Hello again, everyone. Let's settle down. Right. I would love to hear what some of your searches were. So is anyone volunteer to tell me what they searched for, or what they were filtering for? In the back.
Hi, I'm Katarina, for those that I haven't met. So I first put the word flower. So I found hundreds, thousands of hundreds results. Then I chose image. I also used yes to use it with free Creative Commons. And then I also used the additional filters. I chose country, I chose Italy. And then I used the color, slate blue, and then the results were 5.
Nice. So a really nicely curated data set. And if you have a Europeana account, you could now log in and create a nice gallery of these flowers and share it with people. So that's a really nice next step that you can also really easily do in schools with students is, have them have an account, search for some stuff, then create a gallery, and they could put a title and a description of that gallery, and then maybe present it as like, this is my gallery about flowers or dogs or whatever. And so part of the crafted education manual has a really nice resource that you can use in your classroom on how to create galleries. Anyone else that wants to share what they searched for? Yes.
Just because it's so funny. So my keyword was bacterial infections.
Bacterial infections. Okay.
Then I chose images, and use the image. Then I chose color midnight blue.
To get some free bacterial infections.
Nice pictures.
Nice. Yeah. The Welcome collection has a lot of really good and scary images of illnesses and people that have illnesses. So one of the things we're trying to do on Europeana is make it a bit safer for people to search Europeana, since people of all ages can search Europeana, but we have sexually explicit content on Europeana. We have horrible images of sick people on Europeana. We have corpses on Europeana.
Like bacteria.
It's just bacteria. So we're trying to create some more barriers that say, this image may not be safe for people under 18, or this image may have some horrific, imagery, which is really hard because it's really hard to try and find all of the corpses on Europeana, for instance, since they're all described very differently. But yeah, great search. Things I would never think of searching. So it's good to hear other people's input. Anyone else want to share what they searched for? Or does anyone have a question about how things were? Go ahead.
I think it's reading my mind. I was thinking of 4D. I was thinking about black and white photography, and the first that I stressed 4D. One of the first results was really satisfactory. So it
was great. Yeah. So
it was here.
So you search for Ford Model T in it. Okay, nice. Yeah. And so one of the one of the things we try to do, you might see that if you're on an item page, you actually have a bunch of API requests instead of just the one. This is because there's a few other things that we want to show you on the item page. We have other suggested items that are related to this item, and it actually uses a different API. And we also have a few entities that we suggest. It says something like you might be interested in, and then gives a few entities. So black and white photography might be one of the entities that you can then surf to and see all of the black and white photographs. Anyone else want to share or have questions, or did things go badly? Did you not understand anything? Yes, go ahead.
I searched the place where I work, and I added the word ancient, and then chose image. And the image that appeared was one of the most famous artifacts that students see and use at school.
Cool.
And it was just a surprise to me, just because every student in the area where I work, which is a very small island, knows what it is. So they will be surprised to find in this website all these important images.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's a really great way to engage students with their local history and their local heritage by maybe searching for their own city or the country that they're in, or a museum that is close by, and see if they've provided anything to Europeana. And if your local museum hasn't provided it to Europeana, you can go knock on their door and say, hey, we want your stuff on Europeana.
It's funny because it is a mirror. It is an ancient mirror.
Ah.
So it is also for girls. Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Great, yes. Lovely. Anything else, or shall I move on? This was also the final work you had to do yourself, so you can breathe a sigh of relief. I think we've all done a lot of work and had our brains do a lot of intensive activities, so thank you so much for staying with me throughout all this time. One thing that you can do when you're traveling back, when you're in your hotel and you're bored, is do exercise 3, which we won't do now, and is using an API that you really want to use. I'm always interested in Europeana, but you might want to use the API of your local museum, or a social media API, or an API of a program or an app that you really like to use and want to know more of. So if you're looking for cultural heritage APIs, remember that there's this great resource that collects all these APIs together. I'll share this presentation on Padlet, and I think it will be emailed to people as well. So if you can't find all of those links now, they will be there. Or you can just search for your favorite program on Google and API, and you'll probably find the API for that. That was 3 hours of working with APIs. Thank you so much for helping. I'm so happy that you all stayed attentive through what I know is sometimes quite technical and hard to grasp, especially if these are concepts that you're not very familiar with. So I'm super happy that you were all really good students and teachers as well. So I hope you can take this back to your classrooms in your own uses and practices. If there is anything else you would want to talk to me about or have any questions, my information is up here. I was very negative about Twitter, but I'm also on Twitter, so you can contact me there. And thank you again. Have a great rest of your day. Elizabeth, back to you.
Thank you very much.